Morena and kia ora tātou. Technology, most of us like technology. I'm quite passionate about new technology, but I'm not quite as passionate as Campbell Leckie is around wireless technology. And when Campbell talks about wireless technology, he talks about transformational technology and game changer, and I think Al Bramley even mentioned about the wireless technology being a game changer. And I think, and hopefully I'll show that in some contexts it might be, but in other contexts it may not be. So I'm just sort of stepping back a wee bit and say, hey, just let's hang on a wee bit and let's have a look at the facts and see what that tells us. And rather than leap in and buy this technology, just have a think about it and see where it may or may not be appropriate for your use. So this is a sort of a joint presentation. I'm presenting the main sort of part of it, but Campbell was going to join me at the end. I think he's disappeared somewhere. Hopefully he'll come back. Just in terms of the management context, so he's given us some slides just around how do we sort of transform our research findings into sort of a management context. So he just wants a bit of a discussion around, you know, what are the limitations, what's the potential of using this technology. So the context for the bit of work, and you'll be aware from the discussions yesterday, is that the sort of the paradigm of pest control in New Zealand shifting from sort of a localised site and intensive control to shifting to this large-scale management. And it's around, currently it's not, we can't eradicate over large scales on the mainland, so it's about suppression. And when you're doing that, you're trying to manage animals at very low densities. So you're spending a lot of time checking traps that are empty, basically. So you're wasting a lot of time checking traps that aren't productive. So the question was, and one that Campbell raised, can those costs be reduced using remote monitoring? So that was the key driver for this bit of work. In parallel to that, wireless technology has been developing in New Zealand and internationally, and Encounter Solutions have developed a wireless system called Sealian, and Simon Croft is in the audience somewhere, so if you're keen to get some details of that system, talk to Simon during one of the breaks. So their system, that Sealian system, is low power, long range sensor network. It's a spoke and hub system, so the nodes on your traps talk to a central hub that then talks to you at a remote site, you know, on your computer or your cell phone. So it's not a mesh network, so there are mesh networks available, and a mesh network is when the nodes talk to each other. So they are available, and an alternative is just having each node talking to you through the cellular network. And the small rat trap and the display through here has that sort of option. So there are several options out there, and it's difficult to end users for end users at this stage to really decide what sort of package they should go for. So the equipment for the Sealian, so the hubs are basically a central aerial, and they communicate with each of the trap nodes. And then the hub sends data via satellite, the Iridium system, or through the cellular network to your system in your office, if that's where you're querying it. So as I said, it's designed as a spoke and hub system. The nodes are on the trap, and they communicate directly with the hubs, and they have their own sort of end user programmable interface on each of the nodes, and they can be designed for a variety of sensors, but in this case we're trying to monitor traps, whether that trap is sprung or still set. And the trial that we used, you can see there, was on cage traps in the Cape City program. The data that you can download from the system, you can look at it on Google Earth, Topo Map, on your app, or on a tablet, on the UAV here. And Polri, that was doing this work, He had that system set up, and he can just see which traps he needs to go and check, so the ones that have sprung, and he can ignore the others. So the pilot trial that they initially ran in the Cape to City program was based on a network of about 99 cage traps. So each of those has a node, 2 hubs. I don't know whether you can. I think there's a hub there and one there. Sorry, I'm shaking a bit. The target species was cats, ferrets and stoats, and we had 2 people, and this was really important for this pilot trial. So we had one person checking all the traps, so basically saying, I'm not getting any information from the wireless system, and I have to check them all. And that was important to get the time that was required to check all the traps without that information. And then we had another person working independently, just checking the traps that were notified as having been sprung. And having those 2 bits of information was important for looking at the economics of it, because we needed to know the impact that if you reduce or check a lower number of traps, what impact does that have on your checking time? And because as you check less traps, your time doesn't decline linearly with that proportion. So if you're only checking 10% of your traps, it doesn't take 10% of your time. It actually takes more than that, because as the number of traps that are sprung declines, they become further apart, so your time moving between traps increases. So the data allowed us to generate this relationship between the proportion of traps that are sprung and the checking time moving between those traps. So this was important for inputting into the economic model. So the economic analysis, we generated the net present value over 10 years. It was sort of agreed that 10 years might be a sensible time frame for the technology. And the inputs into the model were the hub price of $3,000, the node price $100 each, so that's each trap node. The contractor daily rate we used was $400. So really the key that we were looking at is how could that $400 be saved or reduced by only checking a few traps. The discount rate was 8%, inflation rate 2%, and depreciation rate on the equipment 20%. Just note that we didn't include the maintenance costs and the iridium costs, so our costs are sort of conservative. So the net present value on daily checks, so this is if you don't have any wireless monitoring. The cost of checking that network of 9,900 traps over a 10-year period would cost about $786,000. So that's basically the cost of the contractor over a 10-year period, checking traps every day, because these are live capture traps, and under the Animal Welfare Act, those traps have to be checked every day. So basically 365 days a year for 10 years. Using wireless and assuming there was only 10% of those traps checked, the savings or the cost of servicing those traps was $332,000. So there was a saving of $454,000 by implementing the wireless network. So significant savings over that 10-year period of implementing wireless networks. So you can see the upfront cost is $17.5 or $17,500, and that's for buying the hub and the nodes for that particular network. So what effect does the proportion of traps sprung have on your sort of savings or the benefits? So you can see at 10%, so at 0.1 along the x-axis, the savings was about $450, but that savings declines as the proportion of traps increases. And that's because you're not that getting that much savings from the wireless, you end up having to check all the traps anyway. So that's live capture traps, have to be checked every day. So I've just put the next slide in to remind me. So I'm switching from restraining traps, live capture traps, to now to kill traps. Kill traps under the Animal Welfare Act don't have to be checked daily. They can be left indefinitely between checks. So if we look at kill traps and say they're being checked monthly, if only 10% of them are sprung, if you only have to check 10% of them, there is a small saving over the 10-year period, the MPV value. But if the proportion's higher than about 10, 11, 12%, you're in the negative. So this is suggesting that wireless monitoring of kill traps may not, or probably not, cost effective when you just look at contractor time. Thanks for coming in. And this is, I think, an important fact that people just need to be aware of, that wireless may be very cost effective for some traps, but it may not be for others. And it'll be good to get Campbell's input on a discussion around what are the other benefits related to wireless monitoring of kill traps. Another issue that the pilot trial sort of alerted us to, I guess, if the savings are biggest when your proportion of traps sprung are lowest, you need to try and eliminate non-target captures, because they're just filling up your traps and you have to check them anyway. So you need to try and eliminate as many non-target captures as you can. And you can see in this trial of our target species, we only caught 21, so 18 cats and 3 ferrets and no stoats, but we caught a lot of non-target species, and you can see hedgehogs and harrier hawks were the highest sort of non-targets. But they ended up filling up traps, so if you were just responding to traps notified as sprung, you're putting a lot of effort into checking traps that have just captured non-target species. So again, to make these systems work cost effectively, it's important to try and minimise non-target species. So conclusions, wireless trap monitoring can provide, and I would say, significant savings, especially live capture traps that require that daily checking, and that's a legal requirement. The benefits and savings are very sensitive to trap checking frequency and the proportion of traps sprung. Benefits of wireless when using kill traps still to be fully teased apart, and it'll be good to have that discussion with Campbell in a few minutes. It's really important to minimise those non-target species, and we need to look at maybe some other options. Should you lease this technology so you pay for it out of your operating expenses rather than fully purchase under CapEx? And we need, and again Campbell might expand on this, we need to identify the sort of the potential non-monetary benefits and values of using wireless, and that might include encouraging community participation in trap programs and remote monitoring of the catch efforts, so just monitoring what farmers or volunteers might be doing. So I might invite Campbell up now, and if we can just maybe have a bit of a wider discussion around the sort of the management context and what some of the issues might be. Yeah. Thanks, Bruce. Yep.
So I think just wanted to make a few comments around the management context for some of this stuff. And I won't cover all of these in a whole lot of detail. The first point up here is wireless trapping, particularly the live capture, and you saw Al's comments yesterday, will significantly reduce the cost of live capture leg hold or cage trapping. But the other comment I'd make here is, as well, for the leg holds in particular, you imagine if you're going out across the landscape and you are doing initial knockdown or maybe even baiting, trying to go for survivors, what if you're actually able to multi-bait for feral cats, mustelids and possums at the same trap at the same time? and that trap is 90% less costly to run across a management area. So I think there's multi-species benefits for some of these tools around things like leg holds. You actually multi-species benefit, you can lure for them, but you'll do it at a very cost-effective way. So that's just another thing to consider. I think we shouldn't underestimate the ability for farmers to actually understand what's going on their farm with wireless. A lot of them are, and you'll meet, for those of you going on the Cape to City field trip, you'll meet a guy called Matt Nilsson. He's a farmer out in the Cape to City project, and they're very interested in what actually happens with their catch traps and their wireless stuff. So the ability for farmers to see that is actually quite useful over time. And also, just stop and think for a minute. Take the Hawke's Bay region, step forward 10 or 15 years, and what if we've got 500,000 hectares under suppression for farmland, and it could be eradication, but let's just say for now suppression. And what do you think you'll be able to do as an agency if you can understand on a daily basis or weekly basis the actual catch of different species across a huge network like that? Your information picture and how you will manage what you do will be totally different to what it is now, in my view. So in terms of the ability for wireless to give you an information picture across huge areas of the landscape and understand in much more detail what's happening with your pests, that will be highly valuable in a management context, I think, as well. So the other comment is, in terms of farmland, we have a huge reliance on Brodifacoum. We want to exit the use of that at the large scale we've got because we see it as a 10 to 15 year risk around lack of acceptance of the toxin because of its residual issues. Large scale trapping networks will help us to exit that over time. Being able to do it cost effectively will make a big difference. And Al talked about it yesterday. Quite frankly, without being too bullish, I think wireless leg hold trap monitoring absolutely opens the door to eradication on farmland, particularly of possums. They would be the first obvious choice, but the other species like mustelids may well be in that mix. And I won't get into it again, but the stuff Al was talking about yesterday around low-cost virtual barriers, you'll never be able to do all this in a region at one time. You'll be doing incremental areas, so you have to figure out how to really smartly hold the line while you're doing it. And wireless trapping is absolutely the door to that as well. And imagine if you can have people across the other side of the world who might be interested in New Zealand for any bunch of a number of reasons, and they could actually invest in a trap network in an area and get up in San Diego or Onslow and look at what that trap network has been catching that they've been paying for to drive biodiversity outcomes in New Zealand. It opens up a completely different door into the world of what's happening in pest management in New Zealand. So anyway, thanks for the chance to have a chat about that.
Thanks, Campbell. Any questions?
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you both. Questions? But there are a few. Yes.
Cheers. Just want to get your guys' perspective or key points on what requirements need to be in place to allow the wireless network to comply legally with live catcher traps. It's been a debate going back and forth in our area for a little bit.
So MPI, the Animal Welfare Group, and MPI have developed some guidelines, and they're available. Basically the bottom line is you have to guarantee that all your traps can be notified that they're either still set or they've been sprung, because you have to be able to inspect the trap every day. That's the legal requirement. So it's a technical challenge, so you can't have any false negatives. So you can't have any traps that have sprung that you're not being notified about. That's the critical bit to make sure you meet the requirements of the Act. If you're not doing that, you're operating illegally and can be prosecuted.
And is there, in my mind I've got this question about, do you have to prove that over a period of time that you're doing that with the network?
I don't, yeah, can you? Yeah.
So just a couple of things. So firstly, just in the big picture, the use of wireless trap monitoring, particularly the live capture stuff, is critical for New Zealand in terms of our pest management in the next 2 decades. And Bruce is dead right, there's an MPI set of guidelines, but there's actually quite a bit of detail in that.
Yeah, that's
about
what
the
I'm asking you.
structures and the things you need to have set up. So my advice is, if you really want to get into the detail, catch up with me afterwards, and I can direct you to where we can start talking about that. But if you're going to get into wireless, I would suggest you start with wireless kill trap networks for a starter, because it doesn't have the same degree of risk for us collectively as an industry, and you'll learn stuff about wireless, how it works, and so on. So that would be my advice. And if you want to get into using wireless live capture, then absolutely I would connect with either myself or someone else in the regional council network, and we'll get you those guidelines. But we need to talk through, there's actually quite a bit of stuff that goes around the structure for how that's set up, the alerts that go out to operators, and how the risks are managed around network failure, all that sort of thing. The Zip team have absolutely got this nailed, and so we've got a lot we can learn from them, but it's a really important area to get right.
Yep, cool, agree, thank you.
My question relates to lures, because the lure life for all your traps is going to be the same, and they have to be checked on whatever until according to the lure length. So where does that come into the economics?
It's very important. So if you've got a lure that's only lasting 2 weeks, you then have to replace that every 2 weeks and check your traps every 2 weeks. So again, the longer the life of the lure, the more cost-effective wireless is. So one of the challenges to really make the wireless for, well, both kill traps and for leg hold traps is to get a long life lure. And people have been working in that space and they are becoming available. But yeah, that's really important. Yeah, yep.
Oh, thank you. Heiko Kaiser here. We make lures, we make data, we make monitoring devices, latest technology, SIM card based. We sell them already since 20 years in Europe for the hunting industry. So is there any tests being done in Cape for these different type of technologies as well?
So in terms of lures, in Cape City, we've been working on a pheromone lure, or involved with that, and the Biological Heritage National Science Challenge has now picked that up through Patrick Garvey. But actually probably the person best qualified to comment on that would be Al Bramley and the Zip team. And I won't get into the details, but I understand they're working closely on the ability to have a lure dispenser, which gives you quite a long period of time over which you have quality lures coming out onto the trap or the bait or the network. So yes, there is work going on. And it's a really key part of the overall resource-saving picture.
And just to add, I think the products you have are worth looking at as well. Yeah.
Oh, sure, thank you. It's more about we're dealing with international pest control companies which make this already for a long time.
Yep.
So I feel there could be more influence or support from those because they have ready-to-go, shelf-ready solutions which just not have been asked.
Yep.
So I think either the sanctuaries should, I'm coming from the industry, so we have so many pest controllers even in this town here which do this for their life for 40, 50 years. They've never been asked, what do you think, how to catch a rat? Yep. I think there's a break between PMANS, which is the Pest Management Association in New Zealand, and also the sanctuaries. There's no communication at all. There's an Ecolab, there's a Rent-A-Kill, there's a Flick, they're all there and they do this since day one. So they know how to catch a rat on a different level, but I think there's information that could be useful. What works in the industry could also work in the sanctuary, or the other way around. So I think there's a lot of open doors which should be walked through, and I think I can only recommend go to them and ask them. They can give you good feedback, especially with lures. Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're
We've
welcome.
got time for 1 or 2 more questions. I think there's one in the front.
Just a short question. It seems to me with the live capture wireless, you basically need a person who's available any day to drop whatever else he was going to be doing that day, he or she, and go and do that. So that's quite a substantial cost anyway, or it's only going to work on a scale where it's a difference between employing one person or 5 to be checking traps every day.
Do you want
So I agree that you absolutely need to have that, the ability to back up your entire network, and if it was to go down, you have to be able to get around all those traps within the legally defined time under the Act. So there's a management context in that. And how you set that up as an organisation, if you're involved in wireless live capture, is going to be really important. So as a manager, I'll be saying, well, actually, a certain number of my staff are potentially out doing different things, and they can be available at relatively short notice to deliver X if the network goes down. And you'd need to make sure that your systems were capable of actually doing that. So you might only have one resource dedicated going around the network, but you need to have within your organisational context the ability to get around it all. And that's a management sort of process for how you get to that scenario. But you're absolutely right, you need to have that set up. Yep.
All right, one last question here, thank you. There's, all right.
Yeah, we're trialling EchoNode technology down on the Kapiti coast, and a couple of things we've learnt from that, we're using kill traps. The first thing is that we can get fresh specimens of mustelids and such like, so we can actually autopsy to see what they're eating, so that's been a really useful side benefit. The second thing is that we've got an aerial, it's low RAR, so it's long range radio. We've got an aerial on an offshore island facing the mainland, and we've actually been able to put other equipment on that aerial, including a camera looking over a marine reserve, so we can sort of go on that. And the third thing is that we're suddenly realising that we may have to change our trap layouts for the technology. So a lot of our traps are sort of on circuits and such like, but we might start putting them on spines, and so we can go in and out quickly to traps. So, you know, we're really thinking the whole management needs to change if it's going to work. So they're just three things that come up.
Good, yeah.